Good evening, everyone. Oh, croaky voice. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another post-season edition of CrowCast Tuesday Night Live. Lots to talk about as usual. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on Facebook, YouTube, and Spreaker, of course. We'll get right into it and say g'day to our fellow podcasters. Nikki, how you going?
I'm going very well, thank you.
I just thought I'd change it up just to stuff you all around. Pete, how are you?
Yeah, very good, mate. On the CrowCast tonight.
On the CrowCast, yeah, very good. And Macca, just towing the line as usual.
Yeah, I had this whole thing before we come on here. I stubbed my bloody toe and lifted the toenail up, but that's what you do when you get old and stupid. But anyhow, no, I'm fine, thanks.
I won't say anything about old and stupid. I'll just get into some Crows news theme music, shall I? Peter,
we took a pause on the final evening before the completion of the AFL draft period, didn't we? So there was quite a bit that happened the next day. We were kind of, I certainly still had some very, very faint hope that there might be a bit of activity with Jack Lukosius, but of course that was probably never to be. Had some a bit of intel that he was looking for a trade back home. I'd keep an eye on that because I understand that's still very much the case. And that he'll do out another year there, and we'll be looking to get back home next year. But we'll see how that pans out.
Now, Peter,
yeah,
you say get back home. So what are these whispers I'm hearing about get back home, irrespective of the team?
Yeah, that's what I heard. It was basically just get the best deal you can. He'd be happy to go to either side. That was what I heard.
Don't like the sound of that.
Don't like the sound of that with Connor Rosie, one of his close mates in the other team. But I understand there's a pretty strong relationship with the Lukosius family and the Crows. So we'll, I guess, we see how that pans out. And look, there's another year, and so who knows what goes on up on the Gold Coast? Maybe, another year up there. Maybe he likes it, and it doesn't come back. It's always possible. It
is always possible. I don't like the fact that Port have entered that conversation.
Interesting enough, we were happy enough to get future pick for next year. I wonder whether that's part of the deal that we're thinking about.
Look, I would be stunned if the Crows knew that Luko wanted to come home and didn't position themselves just to get it done next year.
Yeah, I would be very, very surprised. But moving on to the trades that did get done, probably the biggest talking point in the last day from the Crows' perspective was Alex Keith. That was the one that sort of dragged out right to the line, as did Josh Jenkins. Those two really dragged out to the last few minutes. So how do we all feel about those two?
You probably not just those two. Very Greenwood. I thought everything went according to Hoyle and what you would expect, except that three trades in particular is where we got screwed, and through really probably no fault of our own in most cases. We take Greenwood. I mean, he was worth more than what we got for him. But they had the threat of the PSD, so that meant that they got him on the cheap. Alex Keith, once Gold Coast were out the way, and they could use the PSD situation with Keith as well. I don't think we got full value for what he's worth. I think he's worth about a pick 20 or 22, 23, something like that. And we didn't get full value there. And Jenkins, we actually we just trashed any chance of getting anything by the way we treated him at year end and telling him not to come for an exit meeting, etc. So I think that any chance of getting some value out of Jenkins we killed it ourselves. So I thought those three in particular, we just didn't get full value.
I don't know about the Keith one because we would have liked an early 20s pick for him, but most were rating him more late 20s and 30s. And if you look at what those points, etc., what it all works out as, that's what we got for him. And what we also did though was we devalued what Western Bulldogs have next year, and they've got an academy pick as well. So we actually took some valuable points away from them for next year where they need it, and we took that we need. So I think it was a little more savvy than a lot of people are thinking, because they're just looking at the immediate. They're not looking at the longer term picture, which is what these things are about when you've got future draft picks being involved.
I still think that that valuation in the 30s, that's a Victorian valuation, because anything that was coming out of it, I mean, Brad Crouch is a pick 15, and yet you've got a broken down croc like Danaher. He's pick 5'9" and a player, according to the Victorian scribes.
And that didn't happen.
No, but it just depends which way, just their theoretical valuations and the way they talk it up. It depends which way they're going, whether they're coming to Victoria or going from Victoria.
Well, the bottom line is that we ended up with a future second for Keith. Now, obviously, that'll depend on where the Bulldogs land next year. But if they end up if they're sort of at a roundabout sort of 6, 7, and 8, what does that put it as a second round pick? Late 20s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, probably mid-30s, because of the fact we're going to have a lot of academy picks and father-sons next year.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter, Macca, because
you can't take that into account.
They're not live picks.
No. So you got a future second rounder for him. So I'm not quite sure where the.
Well, I think you should rewrite and say the Bulldogs might finish say somewhere between 6th and 8th. Then let's say they do. Let's call it 6th. That would mean probably, with the extra draft pick of the Gold Coast, about pick 32. And I think that's what some people were arguing. I just thought he was worth a little bit more than that. And look, that's just my opinion, and I could well be wrong. But, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong, because that's what we got.
Well, I think one of the big impactors on our trade period was simply the fact that every man and his dog knew that we were in fire sale mode.
Correct.
And,
Correct.
People tend to look at drafts collectively, and I think that's a little bit problematic when you're trying to assess who's won or lost a trade, or whether, it's fair value or whatever, because each trade is so unique in terms of the position of the two clubs, their current picks, the state and demographic of their list, all those sorts of things. And at the end of the day, unless you're paying real unders like, pick 21 and Jesse White for Tippett, then, quibbling over a couple of picks either side is probably, it's pointless, really.
Yeah, I think, given the hand that Justin Reid was given, and he was dealing with one hand tied behind his back, I think he did a reasonably good job, actually. But, I think we didn't get full value because of various circumstances, but I don't believe there's anything Justin Reid could have done about it.
No, especially the Jenkins one. I mean, that was always going to be a 30-year-old salary dump.
Yep.
So that's always,
Yep.
that's always going to be really difficult. And we ended up with a third rounder for a third rounder kind of thing, and it ended up being a nil-all draw, and he basically went for nothing. And I think that we ended up paying half his salary.
I think that's actually the biggest win of the trade season, because not only did we dump a whole bunch of salary cap and get rid of a player, we also weakened Geelong, because now they've got to pick him. So.
Well, and that's the thing, is they're going to the draft this year. I think they've only got the 3 picks, because picking him up, they've kept so many on their list. They actually don't have a lot of space in terms of playing numbers. So they really only had, if they picked him up, that's only 3 spots they've got to fill at the draft. So for them to get rid of that third rounder, not a problem. They weren't going to use it. And no, I think they were a bit further out, and we gave them our third round, and we got next year's one, which once again helps us out next year. And when that result came in, I actually had whoa, actually we did really well there. Yes, okay, we basically got rid of Jenkins for nothing, but it's what we did with that pick swap which helped us out, and I think was actually quite a win.
Yeah, and on the money side, we were paying Jenkins, I think his salary was close to 600, and he signed a new contract for 400, so we're only paying half of 400, not half of 600. So and so there's a double win there, in the sense that we're only paying 200.
And so I think the way you've got to look at the trade period generally is that if you're going to reset your list, as we're looking to do, you got to. It's like anything. You got to prune first, don't you? And you've got to try and, we had some, probably some average list management decisions in hindsight that probably at the time were, we're looking at, they're throwing all in for a flag, and but what we ended up with a couple of fairly bad millstones around our neck in terms of salary. And so what you've got to do first is clear out, as I say, you have a prune, and then and they'll hit the draft, and they'll hit the draft again next year. But you can't get it all done in one hit. And so I think that they took the first step in clearing out some of that, not just dead wood in terms of players, but a lot of salary as well, particularly with Eddie Betts as well.
Well, and you made a good point, Pete, regards to previous dodgy list management decisions and salaries and all that sort of stuff. And you got to have a think about who's on that list management committee, and that's Rashudo, Brett Burton, Andrew Fagan, I think Don Pike, and maybe
Justin Reid.
And Reedy, and what's the other guy, the analyst guy's name? Banook. Yeah.
Yep. Who, interestingly, he was there with Reedy for the trades.
Yes, I saw that.
So, and he was the one signing off the paperwork.
Yeah. So a lot of those list management decisions of the past are probably a result of an overrating of our list, which I think most people would probably think that's a fair statement now in hindsight. Despite us making a grand final, we probably did overrate our list and overrate a couple of players on our list. The Jenkins one hurts really badly because we could have got rid of him for fair price, a couple of years prior, and we just blinked and paid him stupid salary. And we've done that before with players. So I'm hopeful that this last couple of years, and particularly this trade period, signals a new list management methodology, and hopefully Banook and the use of better analytics at the club and a bit more of a objective rather than a subjective look across the list will result in some more prudent decisions on list management. How much do you think... Sorry, just a question leading on from that. How much do you think list management in the past has been driven by fan sentiment?
I think it's been a lot of it's driven by the fact that I guess an external pressure on the club that this perception of always losing good players.
Yeah,
and so that's a really big thing. And what I think also tends to happen is that the players don't necessarily help the club very much with that, because whenever we seem to get a top, if you want to say top dozen type player, invariably what you get is protracted negotiations and big contracts. And you look at a guy like Tom Lynch, for example. Now he's twice been in protracted negotiations with us, and there's your classic, Victorian first round draft pick, made the All-Australian side, blah, blah, blah. And, he makes no bones about the fact that he will, he'll put his foot in the throat of the club and get whatever he can. And Brad Crouch, as we speak, is doing the same thing. And it's kind of like there just doesn't, and hopefully, as we move forward, this will change with new culture and all the rest of it, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of anything other than whatever the contract is that keeps these guys at the club.
And I think it's also that whole thing of the good citizen. They've been a good citizen to us, so we're going to reward them. It was that kind of model that we were looking at.
Even Sloaney held out. Even Sloaney held out, didn't he?
Yep.
He ended up with an extra year or so on his contract that he probably shouldn't have had. So
I don't think he expected that extra year.
He hung out for
understand. No, I don't think he was.
Well, he didn't. He didn't sign over. He didn't sign overnight, did he? That was a long time in the making.
Yep.
And this is the point that I'm making, is that we don't get a Rory Sloane who's supposedly the heart and soul of the club, and captain and all the rest. We don't get him just overnight saying bang, it's done, and I'm leading the way. Every Victorian player, Jenkins, the same. That it's always protracted.
Yes.
When you're talking about the high quality players, I'm talking about.
And
we're terrified to lose them.
Yeah, but it is also that's the state of the play. Unfortunately, they have so much power now, and you've got those player agents with so much power. I mean, the words that were coming out of Keith's agent's mouth, he was essentially not going to. He was going to get a big payday from the Western Bulldogs, and he wasn't going to let up bridges. And when you actually looked at his player stable, he doesn't have a lot of players, so. Yeah, that agent was definitely after his payday and his cut. He wasn't actually probably doing what's best for his player.
Well, that's arguable. I think what Pete's point is that the club doesn't seem to have much leverage of late simply because, am I right, Pete, in saying you're pointing at perhaps a cultural issue around the players not really... not being there for the jumper, but being there to achieve success?
Absolutely. It's exactly what I'm saying, Fran.
Yeah.
And you look at some of the the top clubs and they just sign on. Do you know what I mean? And they just sign on and they say, I want to be here for... And they take whatever, and if, and if they want to hold the club to ransom, they're generally told to get stuffed and they go and take, the dollars or whatever from somewhere else. But... We seem to have... When was the last time, that you see one of our top, 5 or 10 sort of Victorian players that don't get into a haggle with our club about wanting to stay? It's the attraction is the money, and that's it.
Yeah. And look, it goes back to Patrick Dangerfield. Don't forget that Danger left when we were fair square on the rise. We were a contender. And he went to a club that was probably past its peak. And he may well have got sold from Geelong the fact that, you're going to be the difference and blah, blah, blah. But the simple fact is, Dangerfield was an integral part of a side that was going to contend. And the fact that we couldn't use that to get another 2 years out of him, because he still would have had plenty of time to go and play for Geelong, I think that's really... indicative of what you're saying, Pete. And you're dead set right. You're dead set right that every player, including players that say they love the club and all the rest of it, like Huey Greenwood would have happily signed back on for the right term. Alex Keith would have happily signed back on for the right term. But there's nothing culturally, or there's nothing in terms of the team ethos or the vision that holds them there. And hopefully that's just been a phase that the club's gone through over the past half a dozen years, and hopefully with the refresh of the list and bringing through new leaders and new players and a new coach, hopefully that can be addressed, because there's no doubt, and we've seen it with the review, that the entire football department has been a chaotic mess, and I think that's part of it.
Yeah, you'd almost say septic to some degree, but there is a basic problem which Nicky raised before, and the fact is that so many players come from the Victoria scene, and when they're in Victoria, they haven't got any go home pull or anything like that, and so it is a lot easier to commit. Whereas when they're away from home and they're talking about starting families, they've still got parents back in Victoria, etc. And I think if you take Dangerfield's case, I don't think he went back to Geelong at all thinking that that was going to be a premiership year. I think he went there because, for many reasons, one was to be back with all the 300 inbred Dangerfields outside Geelong there, and the fact that he would get a reasonably good money, but he would also be a public figure that he could develop himself for the future and make himself a future voice in football. And I think he's been very successful at doing that. I was very resentful when he first went, but I can actually see why he went.
No, see, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying in terms of his motivations, Macca, but you and I both know how competitive Dangerfield is, and all those trappings would have been there in 2 years' time, in another 2 years. And if he felt aligned to the club sufficiently and felt that the club was on the right path sufficiently, I don't think he would have walked. I think he would have taken another 2 years. Because those 300 Dangerfields are still going to be there. The glitz and glamour of Melbourne are still going to be there. Yes, his wife was having a child and there was that issue, but I would imagine if he had belief in where the club was heading, he would have stuck around to see that through, in my opinion.
Well, he did have the pressure from and again, it's always often the woman putting pressure on the guy to go home.
I don't want to get bogged down on it, but I'm just saying that's one indicator to me that the footy department wasn't cohesive enough and didn't provide enough opportunities, or didn't instill any confidence in the playing group to stick around and see it through.
Look, I don't think there can't be any argument against that part of it whatsoever. In fact, I think that in the if you take it even from the point that Dangerfield left, I think the culture just progressively got worse and worse and worse until last year. It was, and I think it was it Cam Millis-Yeoman who said it, or it might have been Greenwood. It was really getting ready to burst and
bubbling along. That was great. That was Huey
Greenwood. Yeah.
And look, I thought he summed it up perfectly. And it was just getting to the point of explosion. And the funny thing is that Roo lit the trigger when he made that comment about the supporters looking for another club, and the whole thing imploded after that. So it was in very bad shape. Just
so on Dangerfield, though, Geelong were also in their so-called window that they were pushing, and I think they very much pandered to his ego that he was going to come back and play with Selwood, and they were going to win a premiership for Geelong, where he started his career.
Oh yeah, I get all of that.
Where his father-in-law is still very. I think he's very motivated by individual awards more than a team. The team thing comes as part of that, but it's his own personality is more that individual.
There's not many top-line players that leave a club that is in contention. Not many.
It's a very good point you make, Veen. It's very, very true. It's very, very rare, actually. Very rare. You'd be hard pressed to think of any others.
Yeah, and getting back to the point of list management, I think, Mackie, you rightly say that our circumstances are different to Victorian clubs. I agree with that 100%. And I think we might have had a conversation this time last year on the cast and about this fact. And my issue is that I think we need to be more creative with the way that we handle our list, and actually,
agree on that.
Yeah, and instead of having a flat salary structure like we do have. We need to basically structure up our salary or our TPP to account for players that are Victorian. We need to pay the loading. We need to be mindful of the fact that if we want players from interstate, not just Victoria, but interstate, to play at our club and stay at our club, we have to pay a bit of a premium on those players, and that's where we need very rigorous and objective assessments on our list, rather than paying blokes like Jenkins and DMAC far more than what they're worth.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true, because of that funny pay structure that we have, where we don't want to really pay anybody more than anybody else type thing, and we have little steps, etc., so where they sit, rather than related to their own individuality. So yeah, I think that will come. I think that. At the moment, we're in a great situation that because we've got rid of the people that destroyed the structure and in the first place, and we're going to have new people, and we've cleaned the playing list out. It's a fresh start, so it does give the opportunity to do many of the things that you're talking about, Thane.
Because let's not forget, the last time we had success, none of these constraints were in place, or if they were in, embryonic phase, and they certainly didn't have as much impact, and the come home to South Australia factor was still quite large with South Aussies playing in Victoria. But we haven't had success for 20 odd years, and I think the club would do well to actually look at the way that it handles its list management and its salary, because I think that plays a part. The fact that we've had a slow bleed of players for the last 10 years at critical moments, I don't think that does us any favours, and it doesn't seem to occur to the West Coast Eagles.
No, certainly not to the extent that. No, I think once they go to Perth, they stay in Perth. Mostly. Mostly they do.
Yeah, but there's got to be something else, Mac. It can't be just as that easy, because at the end of the day, Perth's a 3-hour flight away. You know, it shouldn't make anything else.
No. Your point is valid. I'm just saying it just seems that way. And but I think what's happened is that we have created this history that players just walking off and leaving whenever they like, and that encourages other teams to have a crack at our other players as well.
One of the just changing tack for a moment, just one of the things I thought might happen on the last day, which didn't, was pick 4. There was plenty of talk about what we might do with pick 4 and what we'll head to the draft with or without. And of course, we've got pick 4, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've also then blow out to somewhere around about 23 and maybe 28, somewhere in that sort of zone in the second round.
Yeah, 4, 23, 28, I think. Yeah.
Yep. So I guess the thought process is that what do we do now with pick 4, and do we look to try and split that and get a couple of 2 picks in the first round? I guess it depends on what Hamish has got in mind, but I thought that there was plenty of talk around us trading away that pick 4, but it didn't happen.
Well, the interesting thing is that
still happen.
Yeah, it can still happen.
Yeah, tried that, didn't happen. Yep.
Yeah, and the GWS approached us, and they've got pick 6, and they wanted pick 4, and they offered us pick 4 and their first round pick next year. But that puts us in a spot with it's between whatever it is and a hard rock, whatever the bloody saying goes. Because if we did the trade, they then, and if they are in pick 4, it's all about Green. There's an academy player called Green who's a real gun. He's probably a genuine pick 4, and Adelaide will bid on him at pick 4. They won't get him. They'll bid on him, and they'll force GWS to use their hand. But if we trade with GWS and they're in position 4, they'll take another player, and they'll still be able to get Green later then. And that's why we were reluctant to do it, because of the fact we would be helping our enemy.
And I don't think they've got they would have to try and get another picker in the first round to appease us, which they don't have. And it's why I think my understanding is that GWS has been talking with Melbourne, who have picked 3. So it's going to be very interesting. You're right, Pete, that what's going to happen regarding it. Now, Reid has actually come out and imitated that, we're open to trading pick 4 if it gets us the deal that we want. And a lot of people will look at that and go, well, why would you get rid of pick 4? But if he can turn that into 2 other first rounders, with the way the draft is this year, that it's more a pick on needs, and if we get 2 players for the price of 1, wouldn't you do that?
It all depends. It all depends on Ogilvy. If Ogilvy thinks he can get, say for example, we did do the trade with GWS for our own benefit, but they can't actually give us that second round pick that we would like, but the second first round pick. But Ogilvy may have a player in mind which he thinks is going to be really still there at pick 6 or pick 7, and if that's the case, then we would trade pick 4, let's say pick 6 and 7, and something else that gives us a very good leverage to get another good player. So it all depends on that. And Ogilvy's really the man that affects what we do here.
Yeah.
Well, and it's always a calculated risk, because particularly in a flat draft like this one, you want to be very clear about what you think other teams are going for if you have certain players in mind. Yeah. I mean, I've said it for a couple of weeks now. In principle, I don't mind it at all. The pick split, and we trust Hamish to have a fair knowledge of what's going on, and make the best deal. I think. Don't forget, last year live pick trading was very new, and really Adelaide was about the only club that took advantage of it, really. But
us and West Coast.
Yeah, I think this draft night, I think you might find that clubs are a little bit more active in terms of pick trading, particularly because of the fact that it is such an open draft, and you might see some pick swaps go down pretty quickly and pretty late in the piece, I reckon.
Yeah, quite possible.
And the AFL will want that. They'll want that drama to happen. So we actually saw that the AFL, for the trading that went down to the wire, around inverted commas there, was because the AFL wasn't actually accepting paperwork until they were ready to do the live TV broadcast.
Actually ridiculous.
So clubs were actually ready to do deals, but they didn't want that to happen because last year when they did it, nothing actually happened whilst they had that broadcast going on. So I can see the fact that because pick trading is on now and available to happen, I do wonder if clubs actually go to put in that paperwork and the AFL actually turns around and says, no, we won't accept that until draft night. You'll do it on the draft night.
I think the clubs might arc up a bit if that was the case, because I
reckon they'd try it though.
No, see, I mean, at 3P, I agree that the manipulation of the final day of trade week was ridiculous, but the club still had four hours to lodge, and they still had all the trades done and dusted. But could you imagine if a club had a deal stitched up and ready to lodge at, say, 1, and the AFL said, no, you got to wait until 3, and then at 2:30 another club comes along and, you know, scuttles the deal for whatever reason. Can you imagine how disastrous that would be?
Yeah. I think that is how we actually found out about it, that the clubs actually let the media know.
No, the
Because
AFL
I don't
tweeted
think they were
it.
happy with it.
The AFL tweeted it. I don't think
I
they
think
can
they
do...
did after they were...
I don't think they can do the same with pick swapping, simply because there's such a tiny time window. I don't think that'll be the case. You'd bloody hope not, really. Otherwise, it's just a farce.
And as we saw last year with like our deal regarding Carlton that we did, that was actually agreed in principle before the night, because both boards had to agree to it before it could happen. So I think a lot of the pick swaps, the live trading will have.
That's not how I read it. The interviews that I've heard...
The Carlton board agreed to it. They had to go to the Carlton board to see if they would agree to it. So we approached Carlton early.
Yeah, but Carlton weren't the only club nipping at our heels on that. The interviews that I've heard...
Saints were trying.
Yeah. So, no, I don't think... I think they might be agreed in principle in terms of a scenario. Hey, chappie, you know, if someone comes along with X, Y, Z for pick 4, would the board sign off on that? But I still think that live trading is a thing, and I think it is, you know, a pretty hectic time.
Yeah, it is, but those in principle discussions happen between clubs. And so you kind of get an inkling going into the draft of we know they're interested in this pick from us, which then gives Ogilvy and Benoit that advantage of going, okay, we know that this has possibly happened. We can wait and kind of see what's happening, see what other things fall, and then do the prediction, because that's what Hamish actually does. And I think it's why he's one of the best recruitment managers, is not just because of that ability he's got to pull the rabbit out of the hat and we all go, Dude A? Who the hell's Dude A? And, you know, look how that turns out. It's that he kind of knows what every other club is doing, and he can predict, I think fairly accurately, how that's going to affect us and other clubs, and so we can get what we need. And I think that's also how he uses that reputation that we're going to bid on a player. We've actually only ever bid on 3, I think it is, but we've got this reputation of I always bid on players. We've only ever done it actually a small number of times, but there's always that threat that we're going to do it that makes clubs jump early, or we do it, and what it does is makes that club move their later picks, which enables us to move up, which is what happened with how we got Lockie Scholl. Because we bid on the Taron Thomas for North Melbourne, that took their later picks away, which moved other things around. And then we did a little kind of fun kind of switcheroo, and we got that draft pick. We got him before Geelong, who we also knew were interested in Scholl. So I think there's a lot more tactics that go into a draft night than what we think.
Back again.
Just picking best available.
Got booted by bloody Telstra, rebooted the bloody router.
In regards to Green, there's no doubt that Adelaide are into him, though. We're one of only 2 clubs that have actually gone and visited him, according to reports.
Us, Sydney, and GWS.
Yeah, well, aside from GWS, because he's their player, but only us and Sydney.
And Sydney's got the pick immediately after us.
Yeah.
So GWS either have to do a deal with us or with Melbourne.
Yeah. Or
if they want to get those 2 first-round picks.
Or a deal doesn't get done and they have to match.
Oh, yeah, well, they would match. They'd have to match. And you know, at pick 4, they get a 20% discount off of what we bid. And they'd have to probably use their pick 6, which means that then they're thin on the ground for the rest of the draft, comparatively. Whereas what they'd really like to do is to get another player and then make up Green with a whole heap of latter picks. So, but Nikki, I think we've got a very good reputation actually for bidding on other players,
but we don't do it that often.
Well, we do it more than any other club, though.
No, I don't think we have.
I think we have. Yeah, that's neither here nor there. I just think that it is one of the tactics Ogilvy uses.
How do you see it playing out, Pete?
I think like everyone, I'm pretty comfortable that he'll end up splitting that pick. I think that there seems to be a fairly broad agreement that there are 2, possibly 3 players that stand out, and then the rest is pretty even. So I guess what's going to be interesting to see, as always, who we think is going to occupy those positions, and you can bet that if I think I read or heard something about the fact that that pick swap was based on really wanting to have a crack at Anderson, and it hasn't really come off as we'd hoped. It was looking pretty good at the bye, but Carlton got a new coach, and rah. So
yeah, ironically, our old coach.
Yeah, ironically, and it may well be that that we're content now. A couple of good, obviously the South Australian kids. Dylan Stevens and Will Gould, so they are sort of around the place. We've shown a propensity in the last few drafts to look closely at South Australian kids. I think we missed a few, probably 3 or 4 drafts ago. So I think we seem to have a little bit closer eye on some of the South Australian kids now. So I think that actually for the first time, I sat down and actually had a look at some highlights of Dylan Stevens today. It was very, very impressive.
Yeah,
his highlights package from the year, and he is your classic outside running left footer. So
he's still hard enough at it though, isn't he? He's not outside like Rory Atkins outside.
No, so I think that he was. I hadn't seen much of him before. He's extremely impressive. So he's, and of course Will Gould, is building his own reputation. So they're 2 South Australian kids who look from all the mocks that will go in the top, say 15.
Yep.
And so we might think to ourselves, well, I don't know if we can trade with you've got Freo, who I think they've got 7 and 10. And I think that they've got a kid that they need to bid on as well. I've got some kid by the name of Henry. I think he's a Fremantle NGA kid. So I don't, someone like that may be might be of interest to them. I'm not sure, but I think that we will split it. I think that we might have our eye on those 2 South Australian kids, which we know that we might get in the 8 to 15 type of bracket.
Yeah, and the other thing that is possible at the moment, we've got Riley Knight's in limbo at the moment. But if we were to re-sign Riley Knight, we would have 6. We've got 6 picks, and we've got 6 spots to fill. So it's all spot on. But I don't know whether anybody's cast their eye over the delisted players at all to see whether there's any of those players that they would put either in addition to Riley Knight or in place of Riley Knight or whatever. And the one that's been talked about a little bit is Billy Stretch, the son of former Stephen, not former, he's still Stephen Stretch, but a former Melbourne player. And Billy Stretch started off with a real bang with his career at Melbourne. And he played regularly in the first couple of seasons he was there. He's very lightning quick. He's outside, but again, not as outside as Atkins. He doesn't play outside the boundary. And he's apparently a left foot. I think he's left foot, but he's a very accurate kick. And he's been delisted. I don't know why he's been delisted, but they say he's a good kid. Victor was really raving on about him today, and good character, etc. So apparently we have got some interest in him. So if we do, what's the thoughts with Riley Knight? Do we keep a Riley Knight? Do we move him on? Do we go to the draft? There's all those sort of combinations that come into it.
Well, I think we've got enough list spots with youngsters coming in that give him a 1-year deal and see how he actually goes on Matthew Nicks, because the way Nicks was talking, I think there's a possibility of that kind of role that we know Riley Knight can do, which is a decent-ish tagger, and also provides that little hardness in the forward line. But, I mean, we'd want a bit more out of him, but I think you offer him a 1-year deal if you're happy with that.
I don't know about Billy Stretch. I mean, he's only 23, so maybe there's some. I thought if I was going to look for someone outside of the draft, for me, I'd be looking at Luke Partington. He's one that I'd have a close look at.
I'm going to raise him as well, yeah.
And I'm not sure whether we'd get him late. Whether he'll nominate. I assume he'll nominate for the draft, and
he has nominated.
I assume so. I assume he will. He would be one that I definitely look at because just because he seems to be, he's got a real turn of pace, and he probably was a bit unlucky with opportunity at West Coast, and then he's come back in. He's had an outstanding year for the Bays, of course, and he just seems to have that real turn of pace that may just see him succeed with another go.
Yeah.
So he'd be one that I'd look at for sure.
Yeah, Stretch seems to me to be a little bit vanilla. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up on the rookie list at Port, Marco, to be honest.
Fair enough.
Jimmy Timpus file.
Yeah, exactly. I also wouldn't mind betting that Riley Knight actually gets delisted and re-rookied.
I wondered myself whether that might happen.
Yeah, we could do it as a rookie.
I don't think. I think we would have offered him a year by now. So he's obviously on very thin ice, which means that he's not really integral to plans. So why would you spend the cap? We've got a couple of blokes that we need to upgrade on our rookie list already. So if Riley stays at the club, I think he'll be re-rookied, to be honest.
And the ones on the rookie list that you would upgrade?
Well, Murphy and Butts are the two, aren't they?
Yep.
Yep. Well, Butts, would you leave him there for another year before you upgrade him?
No, I'd have him on the list next year.
I think you need to have him on the list, given what's happened to our defence.
Yeah.
Do you think he will play next year, Butts?
I think he could if he needs to. I think I'd like to have him a bit more time in the SNFL, but if he's needed, I think that he could. The problem with Geordie Butts is that he's a big kid.
He's a kid,
but he's a big geek. So I think he's 196, 197. Like he's a tall lad, and so he does still need to fill out. And the problem is with a kid like that, you probably want him to play in a key post. He's just not going to quite have the muscle. But with that said, he has been playing very, very competently as a key defender in the SNFL against men. So
198.
Yeah, he's a big, tall lad.
He is, and you're right. Gangly's kind of the description for him, but you and I both watched him play, Pete. He's the really big monster full forwards in the SNFL, and they're big players. They're bigger than kind of what you deal with in the AFL. He does struggle against them, but the players that are a bit more on the lines of the size and the mobility, closer to what he would probably matched up in the AFL. He does decently against in the SNFL. But you're right, he needs a little bit more of just that body strength, just a little bit.
I just like him, Nikki. We both love him to bits, and
We do.
I just would like him on the main list if for no other reason, just to sort of say, Geordie, we love you. You should be on the, you're on the main list, champ. You're that good,
Yeah,
and you're
just
going to do
assure him
something.
up.
Yep, that's what I'd be doing.
Vardy Magic asked a good question with regards to Kieran Strawn. What's our read on Kieran?
He's a mature age, yeah.
Is he? How old is he, Nikki? I can't remember now. He's not that old.
He's 23.
23, is he? Yeah.
23, I think. Yeah.
I don't know what you thought, Nikki, but I was really quite impressed with him by the end of the year. He takes a really good contested mark, really strong contested mark, kicks beautifully for goal. Big lad, and rucked reasonably well. I don't know what you thought, but it took a while. I reckon by about halfway through the year, I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, the best thing that Sauce did of having his I don't want to get injured, therefore I'm not going to play SNFL finals, was it meant that we were playing Strawn and we were playing him in the ruck. And you're right, towards the end of the year, we moved him more into the ruck and less time up forward, whereas it was the opposite way at the start. I thought he did quite well. I think pretty much he will lead our SNFL ruck next year. He's that nice little break glass in case of emergency, but I think there's a decent little player there. I mean, I didn't mind Hunter, but to me, Hunter was more in the Jenkins mould with the way that he played. And I actually
Strawn's just got a bit of X factor, Nikki. Don't you reckon that?
Yeah,
he's got that bit of X factor in the sense that he can go forward and genuinely clunk a contested mark.
Yeah, good point.
And he's got nice. He's a natural forward like Himmelberg is. They worked actually well together. He's a natural footballer.
Yeah, I reckon.
So whilst he looks like Ginger Beggs, he's just got that natural footballer attribute.
No, he looks terrible, doesn't he? He doesn't look like a footballer at all. But
he just moves to the right spots.
I reckon Elliot would want to just keep a fairly close eye on him because as I said, he clunks them.
Yep.
And whereas Elliot just has gone through a period where he's just getting his hands to a lot of them, but not quite clunking them. And so he would want to just be careful.
Do you know what Elliot's doing? His arms are
dropping them
straight up from his head. He tries to mark it with his arms in line with his ears. Instead of his arms being out in front, he's too late.
Jeez, I hate to say it, Nikki. I reckon you're bloody right.
That's why he taps it down. No, that's actually from my dad. My dad said that. So kudos to my dad for spotting it, which is why he was a very good coach of netball.
Well,
the chances of it being right have just risen when it comes to your dad. Yep.
He's been flat-handing those attempts for a long time.
Yeah, very much so.
And that's why, because he's taking his arm straight up to get it. So he does that tap down and with his hands up forward instead of being out in front. A little bit. It's something you can teach. You can teach that out of them.
Oh, yeah.
But it does take a while.
Just a bit of info of...
I was just going to say on that point, I think Strawn gives him a nice little kick up the bum, but also Frampton. For me, that pick up of Frampton, which is just another nice little cheapie, but it's another little thing of, hey, Elliot, Jenkins might be gone, but here's somebody else who's hungry, who's after that same spot. Pull your finger out.
Just for a Vardy Magic, Kieran Strawn, 204 centimetres and 95 kilos. He's a big, lump of a lad. Lump of a lad.
And he's raw.
He's raw, but he moves quite well for that size.
Yeah, he does.
He's mobile.
Yep.
I still wouldn't mind betting that there might be a chance that we see Himmelberg down back.
Quite possible. Obviously, he played his junior football there, and if you look at his highlights, he's still a big lump of a lad as a junior. But he was very. If you've noticed when he plays in his AFL games that he's played, he's very, very good with his hands. Very good with his hands, and he in his junior highlights he sets up a lot of play via the hands. So, his lack of pace as a defender didn't really hurt or look too bad, if that makes sense, because he was so good with his vision and his handball.
Yeah.
So he's very, he's a clever player, and look, I wouldn't surprise me. I think he's pretty big to be going back there, but I think he could probably do it. He's going to have to find himself something this year, Fiend.
Yeah, I think this is the year for
he's
him.
going to have to find a role. This is the year, because I think that Strawn's on his case, and as Nicky said, Thug Features is now on his face, on his case. So you've got these two guys that'll be running around the sandful who, will be putting pressure on him, and so he's going to have to find a role.
And it's a perfect year for him to do it, because we are in that rebuild. There are going to be opportunities.
Oh yeah.
For these players to take it, and if you want it, you're going to work to get it.
I wish he had his hands, the hands of his brother. Fucking hell.
Oh, yeah, his brother. But his brother, when he first started, he wasn't a great mark when he first started, but he has really developed into a top player. Well,
we bid on him.
I've always
I know
been
we
a
bid
fan
on
of
him.
Harry.
Well, in his first couple of years of playing, I used to think, geez, I wonder why we bid on this guy. He's not showing that much. But silly me, he just got better and better every year. I mean, he's been in the system now about 5 years, perhaps, and he's turning into a top player, very good player. But
there's a lot of talent there, Fiend. There's a lot of talent, and you hear Nicky and I bang on about it all, every week. And whenever you engage us on this topic, both Nicky and I get very excited, because I just think that they played in a prelim final this year, and their form only actually dipped when some of the old codgers came back down looking for midfield time.
Very true.
Very good. Very good.
When they were looking after themselves, those lads, they were as good as what was going around in the SNFL. And so the Crows fans can be, genuinely very, very excited about what's to come up from the Bees.
Really love the look at Will Hamill and Lockie Scholl. Those two were very, very good.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of them. Look, we probably need to move on from that over the next couple of when's draft night? That's sort of mid-November, is it?
Yeah, mid-November.
Towards the end.
Can we laugh at Carlton?
Sorry?
Can we laugh at Carlton? Because that was funny.
Rather than interrupt me, Nick, can you just wait?
Okay.
Yeah, we probably have to move on. Over the next few weeks, we'll have a look at some of the draft potentials, I think, in more detail. Maybe throw a few stats up and have some more intimate discussion. So putting you guys on notice, Pete, Macca and Nick, have a look at the some of the mock drafts and have a bit of a look at some footage.
We'll do.
We'll go into
Friday,
some more
23rd of November, Fiend.
Yeah, well, that gives us a good month to go through, most of the main players in the draft. So that'll be good exercise to do. I just need to give a massive shout out to our sponsors before we move on. Obviously, Ryan at Smith Partners Real Estate for all your real estate needs up there at Golden Grove. Go and hit Ryan and the team up out there. They do a great job. Also, the lads down at Down to Earth Electrical for all your electrical data and air conditioning needs. And check out Scorpus's Hardware on Box YouTube channel. He's doing a lot on AMD products at the moment. The new AMD chips are out and he's all over it. And lastly but not least, of course, our wonderful patrons on Patreon. We really do appreciate everyone's support throughout the year. If you want to get on board and support the CrowCast, go to patreon.com/AFL CrowCast or click the Patreon button at AFLCrowcast.com. Do we want to talk about some AFLW draft news, Nick?
We could do that.
Go
We've
ahead.
got 8 new players.
You can take the reins on this one for now. You've got 5 minutes, okay?
Well, we've got 8 new players that have joined the club. The one we kind of all knew about in Courtney Gum. So she was pick 83. But our first round draft pick is Montana McKinnon, who's the ruckman from South Adelaide. Actually loves a contested mark more than she likes an uncontested mark. I think she will definitely get opportunities to play in the season coming up. Gum was definitely there as security regarding knee injuries and a bit of around the midfielder. But the other players is Nawa Allen, who's come, actually she is a Canberra player, but came to play in the SANFL at West Adelaide and won the best and fairest there. So we picked her up with our second one. Nicole Campbell, Jamie Tabb, Caitlin Gould, and then we've got Madison Newman and Chelsea Biddle were our last two at picks 100 and 102. But there's a really nice mix there. They're not all just straight out of the under 18, but there's some players who were in the AFL.
Three under 18s, I think, Nikki. I think three were under 18. One of them was Jamie Tabb, and Jamie's overall family. I'm a friend there and have been a friend of that family for a long time. And been watching Jamie progress through the ranks year by year, and it was inevitable that this girl was going to end up playing AFLW. She's been playing seniors about 2-3 years already.
Yeah. She played with the NT Thunder this year.
And she's as tough as bloody nails, and she loves a tackle. And, I mean, she averages, I think, 8 tackles a game. And
I think she was like 12 more or something ridiculous like that in the under 18s comp, better than like any other competitor.
Yeah, so she's not big. She's only 167 centimetres. Her mum was actually a body sculptor at one stage, and I think did very, very well at that as well. And I don't know whether she's done any weights or not, but she's built like a brick shithouse. I mean, she is one hard-looking unit. And look, I hope she gets an opportunity to play during the year, because she won't understand if she does.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good mix just looking at those players, like the accolades that they've pretty much all of them have garnered. And we do have an advantage because we're the only South Australian team, and so they can just nominate for us, and so we can pretty much pick which players and we can kind of tap them on the shoulder going, we're actually interested in you.
Well, they can have a choice of them. They can actually either nominate for South Australia only, or they can put themselves up for national selection. And there were a couple that did go on the national scene.
So one's gone to the Suns. I think there's one who was it Hannah Munyard, I think, was kind of in discussion about whether she would or wouldn't. She did nominate for the national, but I think she might get picked up as a free agent possibly. Talia Radan, who's, she's found her third club in 3 years and in her third state. So she's at West Coast. There were a few like that. There was a little bit of interest at the top of the draft because actually one of the top players who Geelong thought they were going to nab, she then actually picked the Vic Metro area because that's where she's going to go to university. And so Carlton, who were expected to pick Georgina, I think, Patriarchus. They didn't because Lucy McAvoy was there, so they picked her. And so Georgie slid to pick 5 to St Kilda. So it's an interesting thing looking at the draft because it's a little bit compromised for everybody, but there are quite a few SANFL players who were, as you said, Macca, picked up elsewhere. So it's quite good and quite strong for that competition.
So is it essentially, sorry, Macca, just before you move on, is it essential? I haven't taken a huge amount of notice of the system in the AFLW. Is it more of a zone situation than a draft situation?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And so we have an advantage there because we're the only team here. It's interesting that Gold Coast have the Northern Territory for this year. They didn't pick an NT player at all. So whilst they've got that alignment, the only player they've got is our ex-player, Sally Riley.
Yeah, there was fear we might lose Jamie Lee, but we don't. We've still got her.
Yeah. Because
she comes from the NT, but we retain her. What I was going to say was that for the first round, all but one person, I don't know why, they probably had no highlights, but they showed very brief highlights of the first round girls. And I have to say, Nikki, the standard of kicking has improved out of sight.
Yes.
Some of the boys will ought to watch the way they hold the ball because there's some beautiful drop punts being done. And you can see, obviously, because it's got momentum now and the women are going to start as girls at a much younger age, and they're going to be taught properly at a much younger age. The quality of the women's football is just going to go up, up and up. It's originated as really a very contested game and the ball not moving that quickly. But I think, Adelaide showed last year that you can do that and make it move a lot more quickly. And I think the standard of the AFLW is just going to rise and rise.
And it's going to be interesting because essentially what we did as a team last year was we kind of broke teams by the third quarter because of our run. They just could not keep up with us. So I'll be very interested to see what other teams pick up on that kind of game style and see if they can match it this year. But it's also going to be a bit difficult because there's once again more of a spread because instead of just 2 teams coming in as last year, there's 4 new teams that have come in this year. So that's going to be, I think, interesting. But also on the front is we should by next week have a fixture, which means clubs will have a start date for pre-season because they currently don't have one because that hasn't been sorted. So I think they'll be, by the end of this week, I think they're talking about another vote on the CBA, which they're hoping will go through.
Nikki, just to round it off, and just for those who haven't been following the AFLW during their off-season, are there any notable losses from last year's squad for this season?
Well, we've got 3 players possibly coming back from knee injuries. We did lose Jess Allen to GWS, so the sister of Sarah Allen, who was one of our rucks. We didn't have her last year because she had her army commitments, therefore she wasn't allowed to play any contact sport.
Yep.
But she's now been posted to Sydney, so she's actually signed with GWS. Sally Riley's gone up to Gold Coast. So Hannah Martin unfortunately did her knee.
Mm-hmm.
So we've lost her for the season, which is why we've had the 8 picks. And a rookie netballer, so Maisie Nankenville, she came in, she didn't do too badly. She played against Carlton and I think one other game as well. But she's actually been offered a Thunderbirds contract, so she can't play Aussie rules because of that. So she's still technically on our list. And Jenna McCormick, she went off to pursue her Socceroos or the Matildas, and she actually was named in the squad, so that's excellent for Jenna. But we've always said that once that finishes, she's welcome back at the club anytime. So I think they're kind of the mainish ones.
Yeah,
so it'll be interesting.
Bigger one than that, Nikki. Erin Phillips, whether she'll be available or not.
Well, that's the three knees. So there's Chloe Shear as well, and we've also got Rhiannon Metcalf coming back. So we lost Rhiannon before the season started.
3 big players.
3 very good players.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's going to be...
Chloe Shear is a hell of a talent.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the keys as to how well they go, because that's real talent there.
But what we actually saw in our midfield was we put Anne Hatchard in last year.
Didn't she have a good year? Crikey.
She had a good year last year. I think she's going to have an even better one this year because that girl is looking... Yeah, but she's looking incredibly ripped. I mean, the muscle... She's lost so much weight, but she's kept that muscle and that strength that she's got. I think she's going to become one of our prime midfielders. So the fact that you've got her in the midfield, you've still got Marinoff. We might not have Erin in there, but we can throw Ange Foley, who actually works very nicely as a tagger, which we did use her as that to nullify oppositions, but she can become offensive herself. We've got Courtney Gum, who can play through there. That's a really nice, mature body. Whether her body can stand up to the rigours of a full AFLW season, not so sure. Because it did kind of catch up with her with GWS last year, but she's a nice insurance policy. We've thrown Chelsea Randall in there. We've picked up a couple of the players here that can come off that half back line, so we can push Chelsea through there. We've got still a really nice blend of different size players with different skills, and we've still got maintained a lot of that quality. But we're also getting Ruth Wallace back in, which then frees up the fact that we can play Ponta in the midfield. We've only seen her for little stints in there. We mostly had her up forward, and the skills that girl's got she's played midfield up in the NT. So I think if we don't get too many injuries, I think we'll once again be quite a force.
That's a really good little preview, impromptu, Nikki, on the AFLW, and your inside knowledge of the players and the system is going to be invaluable in January and February when AFLW kicks off in earnest.
Better try and get down to training there, better I?
Yeah, you better. But we should probably leave it there for now. Is there any AFL news before we knock this one on the head? Oh, Matt wanted to know about the esports team, the funny bugger on chat. I can tell you, Matt, that our legacy LOL team absolutely suck balls. Apart from that, I don't know anything else.
Well, obviously, we've still got all the vacancies for the three key positions, and the rumours are we're talking to all the top people at various clubs, and whether we get them or not, I don't know. But one thing I'm very confident about, that the club will go to massive efforts to get the right people for the right positions this time, because they're so much under scrutiny.
Yeah, the club has gone rather quiet, hasn't it, since the big announcement of Matty Nix?
Doing a lot of interviewing.
Yeah,
There was a fluff piece today. It was yesterday, just talking about who was in our sights and mentioning Vozo and Barm.
All the usual.
So we won't get those, of course.
We're not getting these guys. Come on.
God, I know, but love to get our hands on Barm.
No, it's not.
On our footy department.
Not
it's not going to happen, but...
No, Nicky's right. I'd love that.
If you could pick anybody, he's who you'd pick, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
There's still three key appointments, isn't there? There's still the senior assistant, there's the football manager, and there's the culture person. So, yeah, still three key appointments that we seem to be just lagging a little bit on.
And Nick's reviewing the assistant coaches as well at the moment. Rumours are that there could be one or two coming over from GWS. Or elsewhere. Rumours perhaps that Godden might be put in charge of development, and that would make another vacancy, and surely they wouldn't rehire Hart, who's out of contract. So
I think they've been quiet on Hart, but the fact of the matter is that in 9 days his contract expires, and I doubt we'll see him back at the club next year.
You're quite right. They can't say much until the 31st of October because, as you say, he's still under contract until then. And then I think that's when Nick might announce changes to his assistant coaches.
Yeah,
and I'm pretty sure that he'll probably have a senior coach alongside him as well for tactics and perhaps midfield. And it should be interesting to see who that is. But I'm actually quite excited because of the fact that we've got rid of the dodos that we wanted to get rid of. I mean, Chapman's still there, and I think he's one of the problems. But at least he's got to go quiet at the moment. And I think we'll end up some pretty good people in the right positions. And we've got rid of players that were not list cloggers, but they weren't really part of what the future's going to be for us. And I think that, we probably won't. We might even be in the finals next year. But I think we'll all be very excited by what's going on next year.
Couldn't agree with you more, Macca. All right. Well, look, I think we might want...
One of my own phrases, yep, I own that one.
What do you reckon, Pete? Anything before we kick it off?
No, I think that's pretty much it, mate.
Yeah. Look, thanks once again to Smith Partners Real Estate, Down to Earth Electrical, Hardware Unboxed, and all our patrons on Patreon for their support. Thanks to everyone who joined us on Facebook and YouTube, and especially on Spreaker. Another lively night in a bit of a dead spot in the AFL off season. So we've done well to get through the hour and generate a bit of chat. As I mentioned, we'll start looking at some draft prospects from next week, so get around that. And in the meantime, stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you next week for Tuesday Night Live once again.
Catch you next week.
Yeah, good night all.
That will do.